From Joe's mom's basement, welcome to another greatest hits episode of the Stacking Benjamin Show. Hey everyone, I'm Griffin the intern. How are you liking our special 5 days of podcasts? It's been a lot of fun reaching back into the archives, even hearing David Bach. He's now living in Florence, and I know the guys haven't spoken with him for a few years, so that was a nice throwback. So what's on tap for today's episode? We'll pivot this time to our brother show Earn and Invest, hosted by the incomparable Doc G, who loves to probe deep into issues in finance, work, and mindset. Today, he has a community episode featuring Chris, an Earn and Invest community member, and our own Joe Saul-Sehy. They discuss a recent piece featuring Mark Cuban sharing stories of being frugal. Doc asks the great question, why the hell would we want frugality lessons from a billionaire? Chris and Joe take turns telling great stories about frugality and discuss the balance between making more money and being more careful with what you have. As I mentioned, this episode originally aired on Earn and Invest last week. Enjoy the episode, and if you like it as much as we do, subscribe to the show. I'm back with one more tomorrow. FinTurn out.
I'm Kyle Collins.
I'm Joe Saul-Sehy from Stacking Benjamins, and you're listening to the Earn and Invest
podcast.
Hello and welcome to Current Events Thursday. On the last Thursday of every month, we discuss breaking or maybe even broken financial news with both an expert as well as community members. Community members have volunteered to add the perspective of the common man or woman behind the podcast player, but of course, we know the Earn and Invest listeners are anything but common. Today, we are joined by expert Joe Saul-Sehy, who is the creator and co-host of the Stacking Benjamins podcast, also known as the greatest money show on earth. He is the author of Stacked, your super serious guide to modern money management. From our community, we have Kyle Collins, who trained as a chiropractor and worked for over 3 years before deciding that while he liked taking care of people, it was not sufficient when it came to paying off debt. So he pivoted into a highly successful career in solar sales. Joe and Kyle, welcome to Earn and Invest. Today, we discuss a Benzinga article by staff writer Janine Mancini titled, Mark Cuban Says He Drove Cars That Cost $200 with Holes in the Floorboard and Lived Off Mac and Cheese because he wanted to retire early. Janine writes, before he was a billionaire and a standout in ABC's Shark Tank, Mark Cuban's way of getting around was anything but glamorous. Known as the former owner of the Dallas Mavericks, you might not peg him for a frugal guy, like how Warren Buffett is famously cautious with his spending, but it turns out Cuban was pretty good at pinching pennies too. In an interview with Money.com, Cuban opened up about his surprisingly frugal habits back in the day and shared some insights on building wealth from scratch. I didn't have a car that cost more than $200 until I was 25, I think, he said. It was crazy, but that was my decision. I was determined to save money. But here's the twist. Cuban's decision to drive these beat-up cars was more than just about saving a few bucks. It was part of a bigger plan inspired by the book Cashing In on the American Dream, How to Retire at 35 by Paul Terhorst. The book pitches a radical idea. Save $1 million, keep your expenses low like a student, and you could retire early. Joe, let's start with you. Cuban was fixated on this book that suggested to first save $1 million. Does our retirement plan or our financial plan in general boil down to a net worth number?
Man, I think it boils down to something else. I think it boils down to a choice. I think that Cuban made a choice early on. And the bad news is I think when you're young, you don't realize all the implications of those choices. What if you never make it to that million number? What if you grind it out? I can sleep till when I'm dead, right? All this craziness. Work myself to the bone so that I have this forever after that's, unicorns and rainbows. I don't think we understand how absurd that truly is, but I love that he made that choice. And I think it's actually an easier choice to make that when you're young, to go, hey, so far in my life, I've lived on not that much. So I'm just going to do this for a while longer, even though I might be earning more than I've ever earned in my life. And if I can just do that for a few years, then I get to certainly $1 million though is a better number than 10,000 or 20,000 or 30,000. Like the chance that he can do it on $1 million, if he gets that by the time he's 26, 27, 28, probably pretty good. If he doesn't do that, then his chance of financial independence and having to take orders from somebody else is pretty good as well.
How I was interested just in the fact that it's not like I read a book, how I'm going to retire and live on the beach for the rest of my life. It was how to get to $1 million. Talk about your financial trajectory, your financial planning when you first started thinking about things like financial independence. Was it all based on a number? Were you like, I got to hit that number. I got to hit that number.
So he talks about in this article, there's a story about a hole in the floorboard, and I can relate. My first car was given me to me from a family member, and I remember driving home from playing basketball on a Sunday night, and we ran. My buddy and I were talking in the car, listening to music, and there's a dead deer in the road, and all of a sudden we go over, and it comes up through the floorboards, and we can feel this deer on our feet. So I can
Wow.
relate the frugality part. But no, to answer your question, Jordan, my first thought was I need to get back to ground zero. I was in a lot of chiropractic school debt, graduate school debt. And so all through school, I'm giving plasma for 4 years. I'm skimping every way I can. We are on food stamps. Like I'm doing I lived with 4 other roommates. So for me, it was about getting back to zero. I couldn't even think about investing or getting to 1 million because I was 6 figures in debt.
Joe, was the story similar for you? I remember in your story, you were not frugal for a point in your life. And then you, in a sense, found religion. When you made that switch, was it like, okay, I got to be frugal now? Or was it like, okay, I got to get to this net worth number? What kind of was the thinking process of what goals really look like for you at that point?
It's funny, at that time, it wasn't even about goals. It was much more about, I just can't keep living like this. Right. It was less about the carrot, much more about the stick. I was tired of being called all the time by creditors. I was tired of the fact that I couldn't buy a car. I couldn't buy a used car, for goodness sake, because I didn't have any money and I didn't have any credit. So I was just like, I just can't keep doing this. And I realized that the advice I was giving to other people was maybe the advice I should take myself. Like I fell into this trap that, hey, wow, I'm a great financial planner helping everybody else, and none of these rules apply to me. Then I thought, really? Are you kidding me? Look at all these people you're helping get ahead, and you are doing the exact opposite. But the big lie, I think, that a lot of us spenders tell ourselves is that I don't need a good budget if I just make a little more money. I make more money, it'll solve everything. And it certainly can. Look at Cuban, ended up making a ton of money, which solved a ton of his problems. But had he not made that money, the fact that he started off with fiscal controls, I thought was really, really cool.
Kyle, tell Joe he's full of it here, right? Forget the frugality. We should be making billions, right? I mean, you were a chiropractor, and at some point you said, hey, I like doing this, but it ain't cutting it when it comes to making money. I guess you could have gone the other way and super frugalized and figured out a way to eke those extra dollars out to pay off debt. But you said, no, I'm going to go into solar sales because I think I can 2x, 3x, 4x my income.
Yeah, that was really true. I mean, I was already cutting to the bone. My wife probably hated me because I was so frugal. I grew up incredibly frugal. We were paycheck to paycheck. And so coming into a marriage with a bunch of debt that was mine, I just felt it was my responsibility as, in my eyes, the provider. I wanted to do something different with my life to help propel us to a better future for when we eventually had kids, which we do now. But yeah, getting a bigger shovel was really big for me to accomplish the goals I had for me and my future family.
But see, he already had the cost controls in place, Doc. For me, I thought I can just keep spending money. However, do this back of the envelope math BS that was clearly not working for me if I just cover it by making more money. I think it's obviously about the gap, right? It's about, Kyle, that you lock down your expenses and then you went blue sky with your income. I think that's a great 1-2 punch, the two of those together. But when you spend money just because you think that I deserve it, the three words that make me groan the loudest that broke people say is I deserve it. Right. Those are just 3 horrible words. And I was saying it all the time. Well, I deserve a night out. I don't have any money, but I'll take my last dollars and do, a night at a restaurant. Forget that. By the way, Kyle, it's funny because I had those beaters cars too, but that was because it was all I could seriously afford. I remember we had one of those old Suburbans that the state of Michigan highway department owned that the engineers would drive. But so we bought it. So the whole thing is orange, except for the hood, which had been replaced. That was lime green. And the thing was so old that the floorboards in this Suburban were completely gone. You could see the highway underneath the road. And living in Michigan, as all 3 of us have, you're driving down a road in the middle of February with all that dirty snow and whatever, and it's kicking up and my feet were just freezing. because no matter how hard the heater went, I couldn't get heat to make up for the road.
Kyle, talk about that idea, right? You said you were cutting to the bone. You couldn't become any more frugal. Tell me about some of those instances in your life where you think frugality went too far. Like looking back, it just wasn't worth it.
Yeah, I think frugality went too far in the fact that every single trip to the grocery store, I'm concerned about the price tag on every item I buy, or giving plasma for 5 years when I know, you know what, it's not really that much income. It's not helping people that much. Like, so I took it to the extreme in a lot of ways. And then after we got married, after we got out of debt, still looking at the paycheck, looking at the line item for everything we were going to buy. It really, the last 4 years for me has been focusing on how can I be more of a value spender? And my wife's from Europe. She really values buying things of value as opposed to me growing up. You just buy as much as you can when you've got the money.
Joe, talk about that calculus, that decision we make. Because you and I, we've seen this. We've read the stuff on Reddit and the fire groups and people talking about the absurd things they're doing with frugality. How do you know when you're going too far?
My favorite ones, and these will be in some personal finance groups that will remain nameless. The guy that wrote, "Am I the only one who stops at the car dealership on my way to work for the free coffee?"
Okay, I've done that. They also have
no.
They also have like Coke, and they sometimes have sandwiches. I mean, you can get your car wash. I might have done that once or twice.
But if you're getting your car wash because you bought it there and it's a perk that they offer, that's one thing. If your frugality is so big that stealing coffee from a car dealership is the name of the game. I remember we did this TikTok video on Stacking Benjamins, this ridiculous video. This guy was talking about the key to his success was he would go in the back door of Courtyard by Marriott in the morning and he'd have free breakfast pretending that he was staying there. So he's getting all the
that's
waffle.
A good one.
Waffle
Joe,
fix for free. You save that money. Imagine the millions that you have. Yeah, I don't even remember what the question was. Oh, the calculus that goes into that goes
when
into this
frugality
whole thing.
Goes too far. When you look at yourself and say, okay, I don't want to see myself in the mirror anymore. I shouldn't be sneaking into motel to get their breakfast.
I think when it truly affects the value of your life, you can't, I've said this before, you can't shrink your way to greatness. And I think making your life cheaper, when you're making your life cheaper and not making your life better, that's when you've gone too far, because cheaper and better are two completely different. They can be related. Cheaper is better. Vicki Robin talks about this famously. Cheaper is better if you don't care. If it's not additive to your life, then go cheaper. But when everything is, let's do it the cheap way versus making your life bigger, better, more fun, then I think that's too far.
I will say for me, I think retroactively looking back, I finally feel like I crossed that threshold because I just bought an electric bike, and that electric bike costs more than my first 3 cars combined. I've never had a car payment. I've always been good about that, but my first 3 cars were pretty much trash. I lived in Louisiana for a while, and you had to pass a state inspection for your car to be on, roadworthy.
Yeah.
We didn't have that in Michigan, so I just bought whatever would drive from point A to point B.
That's so I got to ask about this decision, because back when I was a financial planner, Kyle, and they were savers like you, right? And very value oriented. Like, was it painful buying this bike? Did it take forever for you to pull the trigger on it? I can't imagine.
I've been working on myself for 4 years, Joe, so I feel like I've finally crossed that threshold. It was painful for about 10 minutes, and I was like, okay, this is going to be a great value for our family.
It's funny because I generally believe in buying quality things, and I will spend forever evaluating whether to buy it or not. I will eventually buy it because I'm a spender, but I've put these I don't know, as I get older, I think about, is this really additive? And I even remember when I was younger, like satellite radio. I obviously love radio. I love podcasting. I love everything about audio. And I remember it took me almost a year to finally pull the trigger on satellite radio. I'm like, really? Subscription for radio and I can get it for free? And there's still people that do that, right? But I finally made nice with the fact that, no, I listen to radio all the time, and I love the 100 stations, and I probably listen to 40 different Sirius stations. So for me, it's a great, great deal. But I think it had to start with knowing who the hell I was.
Kyle, how do you decide when lifestyle creep, lifestyle inflation, spending growth, whatever you want to call it, is okay? Because I imagine someone like you said, your cars were barely roadworthy. You were getting the best deal you could. You learned frugality to the greatest degree. How did you then turn it off and say, okay, I can spend a little bit more? How did you give yourself permission?
I think most of it was hanging out with people in like-minded communities, like the financial independence. Once I got into this world and heard both sides of the argument and saw people, most people, once I learned how to value what I was buying as opposed to just buying quantity for quantity's sake. Also, I think my wife too was very helpful in this. She comes from a side where she was much more proactive in spending and valued travel and valued a lot of things I wanted to do, just never had the money for. So I think really her influence in the financial independence world, all of those things coming together allowed me to get over that hump. Don't get me wrong, it's still a constant battle, but I feel like I've made steps.
And of note, Kyle, your wife grew up maybe more in a middle income family, whereas you grew up in a little bit more of a lower income family. So she had not been through the types of things you had when it came to frugality.
Correct. And I saw like once I recognize my wife, she doesn't just spend willy-nilly. She will spend on things she really wants and values and will have for 10 plus years. And for me, I was buying shirts over and over because I was buying a $10 shirt at Goodwill or Walmart or whatever. Well, no, spend 40 bucks on a shirt and it will last you a decade. So I've really had to realign my values and what I spend on.
Joe, let's talk about articles like this. I mean, Mark Cuban is a billionaire, right? So this is not a guy who I would normally say, who will teach me how to be frugal? Oh, it's that billionaire guy. The other thing is he's not particularly he's not a personal finance guy per se. He's a guy who made a lot of money, so he knows a lot about finances. But is there some amount of being disingenuous here when a billionaire is telling us you know, I'm a billionaire and you shouldn't spend more than $200 on a car type thing?
And the cool thing is, I don't know that he's saying that here. I don't know that he's really preaching. I think what he's saying is that he made this choice early on that he was going to get there whether he became a billionaire or not. He was willing to not become a billionaire and still reach financial independence. And certainly, we see people, Kyle, to your point, you see these people all the time, right? That still earn 35, 40, 45, $50,000 a year and they achieve financial independence. Like it's not always about making more money. It's about making good decisions. And I think when he opens up with good decisions, making good decisions with your money, which is where he opened up in this piece, that gave me respect for the piece. But certainly when a billionaire tells me to follow your passion, right? Following your passion is easy to say when you're a billionaire, right? It's easy for a billionaire to decide, oh, you know what? I like flying kites on a random Tuesday afternoon, where the average person who reads that can't go out and fly a kite on a Tuesday afternoon because there's bills that won't get paid, right? There's an economic reality to my situation. So I think we have to process first, like, what are they really preaching? What's this billionaire telling me to do? It was funny because I noticed that there was an aside where Sarah Blakely from Spanx is in this piece, and he's talking about the car that he had in common with Kyle and with me, his beater car. And Sarah Blakely made some comment. They included it in the piece where Sarah said, certainly not a chick magnet, this car. And it was funny because that actually bothered me. And I love Sarah Blakely and I love hearing her story and the hustle and what she did to get where she was. But I think her saying not a chick magnet went against Mark's choice. Mark didn't care if it was a chick magnet or not. It had nothing to do with it. And certainly I think Mark was probably thinking that if I achieve financial independence and I can stand on my own, it's kind of Kyle, what you're saying, that I had this expectation for myself. I have all this debt, so I got to be responsible. I got to be somebody that can bring home an income stream and responsibly spend money. I don't think, if your question is because they're a billionaire, does that disqualify them? I think the answer is no. I have to think, what are they peddling me? And how does that really jive with reality?
Kyle, what's your take on this? I mean, billionaires are quick to give us advice, or at least we see in news outlets all the time that reporters like to ask them these type of questions. Does it feel authentic to someone in your situation?
In this article, yes, I felt like Mark Cuban, he wasn't doing it out of arrogance or whatever. He was doing it simply saying, this is what I came from, and I was going to be successful no matter what I did. Now, I take articles with a grain of salt because a lot of people will spin it. They're trying to sell papers or clicks or whatever, right? So I always take it with a grain of salt. Unless I hear it directly from the horse's mouth, I don't always trust who's writing the article. But in this instance, I feel like Mark Cuban, he wasn't doing it to be braggadocious. He was just simply saying, I'm going to succeed no matter what. This is what I did to get to this point.
Yeah, I feel, Joe, like almost in a sense, it I'd rather hear this message from like the minimalists, right? Someone whose brand connects to frugality and how it's changed their life and these kind of things. Whereas when I hear from a billionaire, I'm like, I still have to say that's not how he made his way. And I hear what you're saying, Joe. I hear what you're saying. It's like it's part of the plan and it's good advice for everyone. But sometimes I'm like, yeah, but that's not his thing.
Well, I totally agree. And then you go back to whose choice was this? A reporter goes to Mark Cuban. Do you want to talk about, how you started out? Mark Cuban, him being in the news, great for him, great for his brands, great for everything that he does. The reporter's going to choose what they ask him, and he then decides, am I going to answer or not? I certainly would have answered that question, even if I'm not the right person. Like, I just go back to my American Express PR days. It wasn't his choice to do this. Bazinga decided that to ask Mark Cuban this question. I do agree with you. I'd rather hear it from somebody else, but Mark Cuban sells clicks. What the whole key is, it ended up on the Earn and Invest podcast. And that was exactly what Bazinga wanted and probably what Cuban wanted.
We are talking to Joe Saul-Sehy and Kyle Collins, and this is a community episode, and we're talking about the importance of frugality. We're going to take a short break. I'm Doc G, and this is the Earn and Invest podcast. I am back with Joe Saul-Sehy and Kyle Collins, and we are talking about this Benzinga article about Mark Cuban and frugality. This is written by Janine Mancini, and I'm going to read us another quote. Cuban believes that individuals can begin to build their net worth by investing in the market. You can start to make good things happen, he said, adding that while it's not always easy, especially for those with families, the key lies in finding the discipline to save. If you can find the discipline, then you can save, he concluded. Mark Cuban's story shows that financial discipline and planning are key. While you don't have to live off macaroni and cheese or drive a clunker, building a solid financial future might require sacrifices. Joe, at the end of the last segment, we talked about this idea of billionaires and talking to us about frugality. But I think Mancini is onto something here when she talks about sacrifice, because maybe I don't want to listen to Mark Cuban about frugality, but listening to him about sacrifice to me makes a lot of sense, because I'm sitting there thinking, okay, maybe frugality is not his bag, but this guy must know about sacrifice to have built as successful a business as he had. Is that the real message here? Is that you got to sacrifice to be successful?
Yes, absolutely. I think that online, I always hear this great messaging that sounds good, and it certainly sells. That hey, you don't have to work those long hours. You don't have to do it. And certainly there have been many times when I realized that I sacrificed and I spent more time doing something where if I would have spent more time doing it smarter, that would have been a better approach. But I think that time spent grinding and having this expectation that it's going to be a grind is much more real life than I can sit back and watch it come in. I see way too many people that think I'm just going to do very little and success is going to come my way. And that's not how the world works for 99% of us.
Kyle, is there a hierarchy of sacrifice? Because I feel like when we're talking about frugality, that like seems to always be the first sacrifice, especially when you have nothing. But then you start building wealth and you start living kind of a different kind of sacrifice. Maybe it's the number of hours you work, etc. Talk to me about how sacrifice changed in your life after you kind of got past the frugality part. You're working hard. You left being a chiropractor, started selling solar panels, etc. How did sacrifice look differently in your life at that point?
First of all, the fact that the three of us are on a podcast here, I mean, sacrifice to us means something different than someone in a third world country. But when the point we got, stable, ground zero, now we're investing and making money. I think for us, the biggest sacrifice we make now is with our time. We're at a point now where I never would have done this growing up, but now we will hire a housekeeper, once or twice a month. We will often get food ordered in, or we'll get groceries and have them come to us. So for us now, the biggest sacrifice we make, we've got two young kids. I feel like time is my bigger sacrifice. I can always make more money. I will never make more time with my young children. So for me, that's the biggest sacrifice I currently have is time.
Yeah, well, that is funny, Kyle, that you bring that up, because I definitely feel that in Money Geek communities, we overemphasize saving a dollar and we underemphasize saving time. Like, we highly, highly value, and this is the opposite, I think, of society in general. Society in general will do DoorDash, will rent the runway, will do all these rent to own solutions because they don't value money enough. But with the money nerds, another great one, Doc, that I saw on a on a forum was this person saying, my kid needs Gatorade for soccer. Have you looked at the price of Gatorade? It's so expensive. I think I'm going to make my own. If you're spending time, don't get me wrong. If you love making Gatorade and this lights you up, go for it. But if you're taking the time to make Gatorade versus just go down to the Super One and buy Gatorade, I think you've made a wrong turn in your life choices for most people, because you're not valuing time enough. If you're stopping to get free coffee at the car dealer, you're probably not valuing, although that can be quick. The car dealer coffee can be quick, be in and out of there with a brand new Mercedes or whatever you want. Yeah, I think that's what money nerds, that's the commodity, the limited commodity is the wrong term. That's the resource, the limited resource that money nerds, I think, sometimes don't value enough is time.
Kyle, I mean, have we moved into lifestyle design? Because I think we started by talking about Mark Cuban, well-intentioned, this is how I made it. Start with frugality, something you can control. But now we're talking about trading money for time and what's worthwhile and what's not worthwhile. Especially with us money nerds, do you think that we've now transitioned into more the world of lifestyle design and more valuism?
I would definitely agree with that. Also, I think it's seasonal. Depends what season of your life you're in. So I was willing to trade all of these hours in my 20s. Like, I look at my, going through undergrad, graduate school. I look at my wife going through medical school, residency, fellowship. Like, we were willing to front load the sacrifice to then gain our time and money freedom. And so I think if you're going to get to a point in your life where you want to be, choose your hard. You're either going to suffer your entire life, live paycheck to paycheck and not work hard, or you're going to work incredibly hard for 5 to 10 years, front load the sacrifice, and then from there have the more time and money freedom that you want. It's just choose what you want.
Joe, I feel like one of the messages here is the exponential power of doing a little bit of each, right? Like, we can be a little bit frugal. We can work a little bit harder. We can be like some of these billionaires and take a little bit of risk. But when you add those little bits all together, the likelihood of zooming ahead, at least when it comes to net worth or maybe even time freedom, just seems much greater.
I totally agree. I don't think it's one. I think it's a collection. And I think if you do the Stephen Covey and begin with the end in mind, the logical conclusion is going to be a mixture, because when it comes to time, you're going to go, you know what? I really need to spend more time in this area. Either I need to gain the expertise. So it might not be something that I'm proficient in now, but I think I will become proficient in. So it's going to be worth the time. It's going to be additive in the future. Or I need to spend more money because wasting my time in this area doesn't make sense. So I think it clearly is going to come out as a balance.
So, Kyle, I want to ask my favorite question that I usually have when we discuss these kind of articles. Is this article helpful? Is hearing about Mark Cuban and his ideas of frugality, is that something our community could benefit from, or even people maybe who aren't as savvy about money?
It was a short article. I don't think it was that helpful. When I read through it, I was like, I can relate to him with the frugality piece. I can't necessarily relate to being a billionaire and selling the Dallas Mavericks for X amount of billion of dollars. I
Why
think
can't
it
you
was
relate to that?
no, I can't. I think it was great to just have insight into someone who is uber successful to see in the beginning they were willing to do that sacrifice in the beginning. So that was my main takeaway is knowing someone so successful was still willing to walk through the fire of being frugal until he got to a point where he was more successful.
Yeah, Joe, I mean, you don't have to tell anyone in the financial independence movement about frugality, but I'm thinking about people who maybe don't know a lot about money, but know who Mark Cuban is, and reading this and saying, oh, if this guy had to be frugal at the beginning of his career, maybe I should start thinking about that myself.
That's why I think it's exactly right on, because Kyle's in personal finance communities. I don't think it'd be helpful for a guy like you. I think though, for the average person who knows nothing, to get this aha that, wait a minute, Mark, even before he was a billionaire, was willing to get there other ways. Like there are other ways. Like that might be that first. When I go to these personal finance events, everybody's like, I Googled, how do I quit my job? Or I Googled, my job sucks, or how do I buy myself freedom from work, or whatever it is. They end up often with the Mr. Money Mustache article, right? And then it's downhill sledding from there. Like life becomes cooler and cooler. Like you open up a whole different world. But I think this is a great first step for a lot of people toward that. And it is, because even though I do agree with you, Doc, that maybe he's not the right messenger, he's got the name recognition to bring people in the front door.
So let's end, Kyle, by talking about our most embarrassing frugal moves. I'm going to give you one of my own, which was after getting to financial independence. So I had an electric car, and part of the electric car was free charging. And so I did exactly what Joe was talking about every day. Literally, I worked it into my work schedule. Every day I would stop, plug in my car, go get a coffee there. And then there was this long bike path right next to it. So I worked in my exercise, talking about like being ultra efficient. So I'd go plug in my car, have a nice coffee. I would chart on my patients from using the Wi-Fi of the place from my computer. And then I'd go take a 45-minute walk down the bike path to get my exercise for the day. I'd come back, take the plug out, and go on with the rest of my day. That's probably as embarrassing as I got. So I had no fuel, quote unquote fuel type costs, as well as no Starbucks costs for a few years there. Kyle,
How is that
anything
embarrassing though? Because that sounds so serene, and it sounds so like, it sounds nice. That sounds truly I would do that, and not to save money. I would just do it because it's an excuse to get out of the rat race.
Yeah, I admit that was like when you're in the job interview and they're like, tell us your worst quality. And you're like,
right,
I'm
I care
ultra
too
careful. Yeah, I'm ultra careful. Like I double and triple check everything to make sure it's right. So Kyle, any of those ones that you'd be not embarrassed enough not to speak about, but was somewhat embarrassing anyway?
It's funny that's your most embarrassing because that sounds like a normal Tuesday to me. But I would say mine is the company I work for, amazing company, the solar company. But I would often go there, and knowing I could get to the warehouse at some point during the day, I would save. I'm not buying food, I'm not buying drinks. I'm going to the warehouse where I can get free stuff from the refrigerator, man. Um,
Other people's lunches. Is that what you're talking about?
no, it's not like Ross on Friends. Who ate my sandwich? No, it's not that.
Right.
They just had snacks from Sam's Club or whatever, Costco. So
Joe, most embarrassing frugal moments that now, of course, you've moved past?
Do I have a frugal, an embarrassing frugal moment? A friend of mine, made me, we were on our way to a swim meet, my kids, his kids, and it was in Indianapolis, and we stayed at the same hotel. He goes, have you, how much you pay for this hotel room? And it's downtown Indianapolis. And I said, some, decent number, like $100. And he goes, I paid $32. And I said, oh, really? How is that? And he's like, cause I know Hotwire, and now Hotwire is not what it used to be, but then Hotwire, you could Hotwire room. What's cool is I got so good at Hotwire. I knew, and I still do. I know in certain areas what hotel it's giving me when it does the secret hotel. Cause it gives you the descriptors and kind of what area it's in. I'm like, I know exactly what hotel it is. I'm going to get it for like 60% off. Bam. I will do that. Well, I realized doing that with my kids when they became adolescents, was a mistake, because I got all excited that my daughter and I were on a trip and I was going to save 65% on a hotel. And we get there and they're like, yeah, here you go. You got one bed. Like, yeah, that's not going to work with me and my 14-year-old daughter. Not going to happen. They're like, oh, you did it through Hotwire? Screw you. Was pretty much what they said. So I call Hotwire, and Hotwire, to their credit, kind of helped me around that situation. But I realized that maybe when I'm on trips with my kids, saving 60% wasn't as great as just using the Marriott app and collecting a few points.
Now that I think about it, speaking of points, now that I think about it, and this wasn't me, I think it was my stepdad. He did so much travel at one point for work that he was so close to having the ultra gold whatever. I could have sworn he did schedule a flight somewhere, literally get off, get back on, and come home.
OG did that on our show.
Did he? Okay. I think my stepdad did it too.
He was so close to like platinum, and he was going to get huge things. He scheduled one more flight for $200, and but he figured out like it was going to give him thousands of dollars of perks the next year. So he scheduled another flight to just go and get back on and come home.
Well, Joe and Kyle, I wanted to thank you for being on this community episode. As I think about what we talked about, a few things stick out. One is frugality is important, and often it's the first sacrifice in a series of sacrifices that ultimately helps you be successful. The other piece, and Joe, you really pushed me on this, but I do agree with you. You know, Mark Cuban isn't the best guy to talk about frugality, but it is kind of pretty darn inspiring to know that this guy who's a billionaire actually is giving advice that your average everyday Joe and Jane could follow, which is kind of like, dude, you know, you might not be a billionaire like me. You might not have the business opportunities I had, but you sure as heck can drive a $200 car like I did, or maybe not $200 anymore. So I want to end this episode the way I end every episode. Let's start with you, Kyle. A lot of people don't know that you're an author. Tell us about your book and where people can find it.
Yeah, it's on Amazon. It's called Wherever You Go, There You Are. It's a long subtitle, so if you just put that in Kyle Collins, you'll find it on Amazon. And wrote it to my two girls that if I get hit by the proverbial bus walking around downtown Chicago, I want them to have life lessons to be passed on. Yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
That's great.
And Joe, tell me about what's happening on Stacking Benjamins.
We just released our first financial help product, which is really cool. A lot of people do. When I was a financial planner, I would roll my eyes at what people chose for their corporate benefits. And we're getting close to open enrollment season for most of America's big companies. So we have a guide to benefits that we are releasing. And if you go to stackingbenjamins.com/benefits, you can read more about it. But you purchase it once, you've lifetime access. The average person changes jobs every 4.2 years. Mike, during my career, the governments change the rules over and over. Companies change the rules all the time. People change jobs. Whenever you change, this benefits guide goes with you. And as long as we have it, we're going to continually update it to keep up. So stackingbenjamins.com/benefits is what we're doing. It's pretty exciting. We haven't released a product to help people with this type of stuff. And I think benefits is a great place for us to start.
Yeah. And Joe, what's so important about that is the return on investment can be huge.
Monster.
It's amazing how much people leave on the table when it comes to benefits and negotiating, or how many benefits are available and people just don't use them because they don't know they're there.
Or, and a lot of times it is funny because we have a quick guide at the start. Like, hey, if you don't have time to read the full guide, do these things, like check these things, and we will make back up the cost in about 5 minutes for 95% of people that read it. Because people often choose benefits too that they really don't need, wasting their flex benefits money.
Joe Saul-Sehy and Kyle Collins, thank you so much for being on this community episode of Earn and Invest.
Thank you, man.
That's a wrap. Earn and Invest is now part of the Airwave Media Podcast Network. Visit airwavemedia.com to listen and subscribe to this show as well as other fine podcasts. Hey everybody, I thought I would use this community episode as a chance to talk about the state of the podcast. That is right, Earn and Invest has been around since November of 2018. That means it's almost been 6 years. I've had over 550 episodes, over 3.5 million downloads. We've expanded and contracted many times over the years. I'm sure you recognize the fact that I started having ads about a year and some ago. That is an attempt to support the podcast. I do not make a lot of money doing this podcast. I don't really do it for a living. I do it for the joy. So if you are annoyed by the advertisements, I'm glad that you're still here because they do provide a little bit of money to pay for hosting, to pay for some travel for conferences, and some basic things that I do with the podcast. I love doing this podcast. I never did it for money. I don't even do it for you per se, although I hope you really enjoy it. I do it for me. I love to interview people. I love having these conversations. It has been a huge boon to my life to do this podcast, which also supports other things that I care deeply for. What are some of those things? For one, it is the mastermind connected to this podcast. I am still doing the Wealth with Purpose Mastermind. I've got about 25 people in it. We have our monthly meetings and our weekly happy hours. It has been wonderful to interact with a group of people who are in that same place that many of us are. We've kind of figured out enough about money to feel more safe, more secure, more on our path, if not there already. But a lot of us are still questioning what that means. What now? How do we use our money? How do we use our wealth to live our best lives? What I love about the mastermind is accountability. It's the fact that we are all there together. And I've had people who've been in this mastermind now greater than a year. If you're interested in becoming part of the Wealth with Purpose Mastermind, just go to earnandinvest.com/mastermind. Again, earnandinvest.com/mastermind. That is one of the things that has sprouted out from this podcast. The other, of course, is my books. You guys know I wrote the book Taking Stock in August of 22. It came out. It has been a pleasure talking to people about the book, doing speaking engagements, interacting with people. As you all know, my next book is coming out. It is called The Purpose Code. It comes out in January 2025. I am really, really proud of this book. It stemmed from the fact that after reading Taking Stock, a lot of people had questions about purpose, and I did a deep dive into the research. I thought about all the people I had interacted with through my hospice practice and seeing people die. I thought about all the experts I had interviewed on my podcast itself and all the experience I had from writing Taking Stock and doing public speaking, and that led to some real significant conclusions about purpose and the role it plays in our lives and how we typically get purpose wrong. That is The Purpose Code. It comes out in January 2025. You can find it on Amazon now. I'm not officially calling this the pre-order season, but it is out there, and I'd love you to take a look and take a listen. One of the other things that has come from this podcast is the Path to Purpose coaching program. I've done individual coaching on a number of people as well as doing it through my mastermind. I've really found it exciting to work with people about their sense of purpose and not only delve into purpose, but something that's also important, meaning. What I often tell people is a lot of people think they have a purpose problem, but they actually have a meaning problem. If you're wondering what I mean by that, you can go back and listen to some of our episodes, or if you think you are a candidate for coaching, go to earnandinvest.com/coaching. That's Path to Purpose Coaching. I would love to help you if you're struggling with career, if you're struggling with this idea of enough, or you're trying to find what purpose looks like in your life. That's it. That is the state of the podcast. It's now been 5 going on 6 years. I love making Earn and Invest. I love having these conversations. I hope you enjoy them too. Thank you so much for being part of this community, and thank you for listening. If you want to interact more with people in this community, you can also join the Facebook group. That's earnandinvest.com/Facebook. Again, earnandinvest.com/Facebook. We'd love to see you there. Awesome. As you guys know, I leave it running just for a few minutes to catch our after show. Joe, you did convince me. I was all kind of hell and, fury that, Mark Cuban is not the guy to be telling me about frugality. But you made some good points there. Like, it is kind of inspiring the more I think about it.
Once in a blue moon, every once in a while, I say something that resonates.
Kyle, you don't realize, but Joe and I, pretty much our excitement is just arguing with each other. Like on my show, on his show, off the show, just by text, whatever it is. We just like to argue with each other.
That's a good friend to have. It's important.
How old are your kids?
3.5 and 11 months.
Oh, that's fabulous. I just remember those ages, and better you than me now, dude. But that's so fun.
Yeah, it is fun, but it's a lot of time and a lot of effort. I'm looking. This is the hard part about being a parent. I think you don't want to look too much forward to the future when they're older, because then they don't need you as much. But you also want that time for yourself and to reinvigorate and do the things you enjoy, right?
Well, with the 3.5-year-old, you're finally past that point, which is they understand, they're mobile, but they don't yet understand no. Remember that? Like that's, and your 11-month is probably about getting there to increase mobility but doesn't understand no yet. That's like the danger zone for me.
Yep.
Yeah, those are the tiring years. Like, yeah, they're the physically tiring years. Like these are the emotionally tiring years that I'm going through with the 16 and 19-year-old. But you're in the physically tiring years.
It does become more cerebral over time. Like it goes from physically hard to cerebrally hard. Like my son gets in the backseat of the car and asks his mom, what's French kissing, when he's in like 4th grade. And what's funny is that we knew exactly where it came from, by the way. You know how Cheryl answered that question? She said, "You've been hanging out with Jack Roble." And it goes, "How did you know?" "Yeah, because Jack Roble's the youngest of 5 kids. Jack Roble knows all the stuff the kids that age don't know."
So Kyle, when do you start teaching your kids about frugality, right? Joe, you have
I thought you were going to say when you start teaching about French kissing. I'm like, dude.
I'm not going to go there. Joe, you have 2 kids who are kind of diametrically opposed, maybe when it comes to money, or maybe when it comes to frugality. Your daughter,
they were when they were younger. But what's cool is, I think one of the best things I did as a dad was introduce them to people that aren't me. So I got them, Scott Trench and Aaron Lowry, Broke Millennial, had books out at about the same time. And I just wrote to them and I said, "Hey, would you sign books for my kids and I gave it to them. We celebrate Christmas at our house. So we, anyway, wrapped them up and gave them both books. And my son,
fantastic books, both fantastic.
Yeah, books. Phenomenal. And my son really took to, Scott Trench, but he was naturally frugal. So he was on the let's make more money train. And my daughter was much more like me, like a spender. So having Aaron Lowry in that messaging of, hey, do I really want this? Like she still is a spender, but she's the best thrifter. Like my daughter never wears any clothing that's brand new, ever. And she always looks like $1 million. Like it's incredible how frugal she's become while still, making sure she celebrates her dad non-frugal roots. You got that in your future, Kyle. That's in your future.
We'll see. I think my wife would be classified as more of the spender, even though she's really good at it. But I'm
talking about your 2 kids being complete opposites. You're like, who the hell are these kids? They were twins. Mine were twins. And you're like, how are they so opposite of each other?
Yeah, like my son will spend without even thinking about it, whereas my daughter, you can't get her to spend anything. Like she invites grandma out for lunch so that grandma can take her to the bookstore and buy her a book. Yeah, so like it's like, "Oh, grandma, how about we spend some time together?" So
my son does that. He's getting ready, as you know, Doc. He's getting ready to go to Camp 5 with me, and I'm super blast. I'm super excited about that. But when he travels with Dad, he works at Microsoft as an engineer working on the Windows operating system, which you can imagine the money he makes. He's
paying the way, man. He's taking us out to dinner. He's buying drinks. He's buying drinks. And if you don't know, sorry, I keep on interrupting you. So Stacking Benjamins is doing a community event in Minnesota the night before Camp 5, right? It's a Thursday.
Yes.
Do we know the date in case anyone's listening here? They can show up. It's Thursday.
Yes. This is on the 29th, right?
And Joe and I will be there. And apparently Nick's going to be buying drinks.
Well, we should tell Nick to buy drinks. But whenever Nick travels with Dad, He also owns 14. He's his whole, because he's going to be speaking with me. His current portfolio houses are worth like $2.9 million. I've never seen that kid when he traveled with his dad ever flinch toward picking up the check. Not once. not one time. He and his sister, we would take them to Disney when they were kids, and we give them an allowance every day because, you know, every ride ends in a gift shop, you know, at Disney. And so rather than have them beg, we're like, hey, you get this amount of money. My daughter would spend it after the first ride, like the money was gone every day. My son pocketed every dollar, like didn't buy a thing and took it all home. You had no idea where the hell that money went. And they're twins. It's so weird.
How old are they now?
Almost 30, 29. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. 29. He still lets dad pay. How great is that?
What a good day.
Great. It's great for one of us. Yeah. I'm happy to